Admiral Vashy clicked his 6 mandibles in what passed for laughter among the Zephyrian species. The holographic display floating above the conference table showed a 3-dimensional model of a human male, rotating slowly like some kind of bizarre museum exhibit. "Look at this thing," Vashy wheezed, his voice carrying that distinctive metallic rasp that made every Zephyrian sound perpetually annoyed. No natural armor plating, no claws, no fangs. Not even decent eyesight without those ridiculous glass contraptions they strapped to their faces. General Krafthnog, whose species resembled an 8-foot-tall cross between a rhinoceros and a very angry filing cabinet, snorted in agreement. His massive frame shook the floor panels as he leaned forward to examine the display more closely. "The skin is particularly pathetic," Krafthnog rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "One layer of this tissue paper, and that is supposed to protect their internal organs. My youngest spawning could tear through that with a casual swipe." The 2 military leaders had been tasked by the Galactic Council with reviewing the newest applicant species for military integration. The humans of Sol 3 had recently achieved faster-than-light travel and were eager to join the galactic community. Standard protocol required a full physiological assessment before determining their potential combat classification. "Let me read you some of these statistics," Vashy continued, scrolling through the data with obvious amusement. Average height 5 to 6 feet, weight barely 200 pounds for their largest specimens. Reaction time, a sluggish 0.2 seconds, and get this, they can only see in a narrow spectrum of light. Krafthnog made that grinding noise that passed for chuckling among his people. Their bones break under minimal pressure. Their joints dislocate if twisted wrong. They require constant hydration and feeding, or they simply stop functioning. "Oh, it gets better." Vashy's mandibles clicked faster, a sign of increasing mirth. "They have exactly 0 natural weapons. No venom, no paralyzing secretions, no electrical discharge capabilities. They cannot even regrow lost limbs like any civilized species should be able to do." The general pulled up additional files, shaking his massive head in disbelief. "Their planet's gravity is so weak that they bounce around like children's toys. The atmospheric pressure is laughably low. No wonder they are so fragile, coming from such a gentle world. The xenobiologists are calling them persistence hunters," Vashy added, making air quotes with his secondary appendages. "Apparently they used to chase their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Not exactly the most efficient hunting strategy, is it?" "Pathetic," Krafthnog agreed. "Any proper predator would have evolved claws or acid spit, or at least some basic offensive capabilities. These humans just ran around until something died of boredom." Admiral Vashy composed himself and activated the communication link to the Galactic Council chambers. The massive assembly hall appeared in miniature above their table, showing representatives from 47 different species in heated discussion. "Esteemed council members," Vashy announced, his voice carrying the appropriate military formality, "General Krafthnog and I have completed our assessment of the human species from Sol 3. The chamber quieted as hundreds of eyes, optical sensors, and various other sensory organs focused on the transmission. After extensive analysis of their physiological capabilities, combat potential and survival instincts, we recommend immediate classification as Class F fragile species, requiring protective custody protocols in any military engagement." A wave of agreement rippled through the assembly. Judge Quintara, the Council's senior military advisor, nodded his approval. "The humans will need constant supervision to prevent accidental injury. We cannot risk losing an entire species to a minor skirmish." "Precisely," Krafthnog interjected. "These creatures would be obliterated by the first enemy combatant they encountered. Their role must be strictly limited to non-combat support functions." As if summoned by their conversation, urgent battle alerts began flashing across every screen in the chamber. The savage Mortyn Empire had launched another offensive against the outer colonies. Their reptilian warriors were notorious for their brutality, standing 9 feet tall with natural armor plating that could deflect standard plasma rounds. "Speaking of combat," Judge Quintara announced grimly, "we need every available species contributing to the war effort. The Mortyn advance shows no signs of slowing. Admiral Vashy's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. What about using the humans as morale boosters? Keep them well behind the lines, of course. Sometimes troops fight harder when they think they are protecting someone helpless. Brilliant, Krafthnog grumbled approvingly. Put them in charge of supply depots, medical facilities, things like that. Nice and safe, but visible enough to remind our real warriors what they are fighting for. The council voted unanimously. The humans would be integrated into the war effort immediately, but strictly in rear echelon support roles. They would be kept far from any actual combat, protected like the precious, delicate creatures they obviously were. After all, what could possibly go wrong with that plan? 3 standard galactic weeks later, Judge Quintara stood in the command center of Forward Operating Base Sanctuary, admiring what he considered to be a masterpiece of military planning. The base was positioned a comfortable 50 kilometers behind the front lines, nestled in a valley so secure that it had not seen combat action in over 2 years. Perfect, Quintara murmured to himself, watching the human contingent unload their equipment. Absolutely foolproof. Commander Tom Marley stepped down from the transport vessel, his boots hitting the landing pad with a soft thud that made several nearby Zephyrian guards flinch. At just under 6 feet tall, he was considered average for his species, but his calm demeanor and steady gaze had an unsettling effect on the alien personnel. Commander Marley, Judge Quintara, approached with what he hoped was a reassuring tone. Welcome to Base Sanctuary. As you can see, we have selected the most secure location possible for your people. Marley nodded politely, his eyes already scanning the defensive positions with a professional assessment that made Quintara slightly uncomfortable. Appreciate the thought, Judge. Where do you need us? Supply depot management, medical support, communications relay, that sort of thing, Quintara explained, gesturing toward the rear sections of the base. Nothing dangerous, of course. We cannot risk having your people anywhere near actual combat operations. The judge watched as more humans disembarked from the transport. There was Brandon Torres, a stocky man with grease-stained fingers, who had been assigned to equipment maintenance. Amy Kowalski followed, carrying medical supplies with the kind of efficiency that suggested extensive training. 23 humans total, each carefully screened to ensure they posed no risk to themselves or others. The perimeter is defended by automated plasma turrets. Quintara continued his briefing, clearly proud of the security measures. We have early warning sensors covering a 30-kilometer radius. The Mortyn forces are currently engaged 55 kilometers to the northeast, well beyond any possible threat range. Commander Marley simply nodded again, though his expression suggested he found something amusing about the entire setup. Over the following days, the humans settled into their assigned roles with remarkable efficiency. Brandon Torres had somehow managed to improve the efficiency of 3 different supply systems within his first week. Amy Kowalski had reorganized the medical bay so effectively that injured personnel were being treated faster than ever before. The alien personnel remained slightly nervous around their human counterparts, but gradually began to appreciate their competence. Even Judge Quintara allowed himself to feel satisfied with his placement decision. That satisfaction lasted exactly 18 days. The attack came at dawn, precisely when the base's defensive algorithms predicted 0 probability of enemy contact. A full Mortyn assault force had somehow bypassed every sensor, avoided every patrol, and materialized out of the morning mist, like nightmare made manifest. The first plasma burst obliterated the main communication array. The second took out the primary power generator. Within 30 seconds, Base Sanctuary had transformed from a secure rear echelon facility into a blazing war zone. Judge Quintara, awakened by the explosion that had been his command center, stumbled from his quarters to find absolute chaos. Alien personnel were running in every direction, some toward escape pods, others toward whatever cover they could find. The automated defense turrets were firing wildly at shadows, while 9-foot-tall Mortyn warriors poured through breaches in the perimeter wall. Evacuation Protocol 7, someone screamed over the comm system. All non-essential personnel to emergency transports immediately. Quintara ran toward the landing pad, his legs carrying him faster than he had moved in decades. Behind him, he could hear the distinctive roar of Mortyn battle cries, mixed with the whine of plasma weapons and the screams of the wounded. He was halfway to safety when he realized something odd. The humans were not running. Commander Mali stood in the middle of the supply depot, calmly issuing orders to his people while enemy fire rained down around them. Instead of fleeing, they were taking defensive positions behind supply crates and makeshift barriers. "What are you doing?" Kuntara shouted over the noise. "The evacuation order includes everyone." Mali glanced up from the tactical display he had somehow produced from nowhere. "Copy that, Judge. We will hold this position and cover your retreat." "Hold the position?" Kuntara's voice cracked with disbelief. "You are supply personnel, non-combatants. You have no weapons, no armor, no training for this." That was when he noticed Brandon Torres crouched behind an overturned table, wielding what appeared to be a plasma cutter that had been hastily modified with kitchen utensils and spare wiring. The makeshift weapon discharged with a sound like thunder, and a charging Mortyn warrior collapsed with a smoking hole through his chest armor. "Torres always was good with his hands," Mali commented casually, as if jury-rigging weapons from kitchen supplies was perfectly normal behavior. On the other side of the depot, Amy Kowalski was dragging wounded alien soldiers to safety, while plasma bolts sizzled past her head. She worked with methodical precision, apparently unbothered by the fact that she was performing battlefield medicine in the middle of an active fire zone. Judge Quintara stared in shock as the fragile humans not only refused to retreat, but began pushing back against the Mortyn assault. They moved with purpose, communicated with hand signals, and displayed a level of tactical awareness that should have been impossible for rear echelon support personnel. "This is not possible," he whispered to himself, watching a group of humans coordinate a flanking maneuver using improvised weapons and pure determination. The evacuation transport lifted off without him, leaving Judge Quintara crouched behind a supply crate, watching the most impossible battle of his military career unfold before his eyes. Somewhere in the distance he could hear Admiral Vashy screaming over the comm channel, demanding status reports that nobody had time to give. The safe assignment had just become very unsafe indeed. Admiral Drehorn's flagship received the distress signal from base sanctuary at 0847 hours. Standard tactical doctrine suggested that any rear echelon facility under direct Mortyn assault would be overrun within 15 minutes, 20 at the absolute maximum. By 0915 hours, when his relief force finally arrived at the coordinates, Drehorn fully expected to find smoking ruins and scattered debris. What he found instead was a supply depot that was somehow still operational, still fighting, and somehow winning. "This cannot be correct," Admiral Drehorn muttered, staring at the tactical display from his command ship. The base should have been obliterated 47 minutes ago. Instead, his sensors showed ongoing defensive fire, organized resistance patterns, and what appeared to be a successful counteroffensive operation. The first shuttle of reinforcements landed in what had been the main courtyard, now cratered with plasma burns and littered with Mortyn casualties. Quartermaster A methodical Regillian, whose species prided itself on logical analysis, stepped out expecting to coordinate a rescue operation for survivors. Instead, he found Commander Mali calmly directing human personnel in the construction of defensive barriers using destroyed Mortyn equipment. "Quartermaster," Mali called out cheerfully, as if greeting an old friend rather than emergency reinforcement. "Perfect timing. We could use some help moving these plasma cannons into better firing positions." Quartermaster A's three eyes blinked in sequence, the Regillian equivalent of a system crash. "Commander Mali, how are you still alive?" Mali paused in his inspection of a captured Mortyn weapon. "Well, we took cover when the shooting started, figured out their attack patterns, and started shooting back. Pretty standard stuff, really." "Standard?" Quartermaster A's voice climbed an octave. "You held defensive positions that should have fallen in minutes, with improvised weapons, against Mortyn shock troops." "Oh, the improvised weapons?" Mali nodded toward where Brandon Torres was explaining something to a group of fascinated alien engineers. "Torres rigged up some pretty clever stuff. Turns out you can make a decent grenade launcher out of a food synthesizer and some spare power cells. Quartermaster watched in stunned silence as Torres demonstrated his creation to the reinforcements. The device looked like it had been assembled by a particularly creative scavenger, but it fired with devastating accuracy. The explosion radius is a bit unpredictable, Torres was explaining to his audience, but it sure makes the big lizard guys think twice about charging our position. Across the courtyard, Mortyn, the Relief Force's chief medical officer, was having his own crisis of understanding. His species had evolved from pack hunters and possessed pain tolerance that was considered exceptional among galactic standards. Nothing had prepared him for what he found in the human medical station. Amy Kowalski was treating a wounded Zephyrian soldier while a makeshift bandage covered what was obviously a severe burn on her left arm. She worked with steady hands, showing no sign of the pain that should have incapacitated any reasonable being. Medic Kowalski, Mortyn approached cautiously. You appear to be injured. You should be receiving treatment, not providing it. Amy glanced up from her patient with a slight smile. It is just a scratch. I will get to it once we finish with the serious cases. Mortyn examined her injury more closely. The burn covered nearly 30% of her forearm and should have required immediate medical attention by any civilized standard. Yet she continued working as if nothing had happened. Your pain tolerance is remarkable, Mortyn admitted, his voice filled with professional admiration. Not really, Amy replied, carefully adjusting her patient's IV line. Remember that time in training when Jenkins broke his leg during the obstacle course and finished the run anyway? Now that guy had pain tolerance. As if summoned by the conversation, a human named Jenkins limped past, carrying ammunition to the forward positions. His right leg was clearly fractured, supported by an improvised splint made from supply crates and medical tape. Mortyn stared. That human is ambulatory with a fractured femur. Yeah, Jenkins is tough, Amy agreed. He says walking on it keeps it from stiffening up. Humans are weird that way. Back in orbit, Admiral Drahorn was receiving field reports that made less sense with each transmission. Admiral, his communications officer reported, Quartermaster O is requesting immediate resupply of conventional weapons. He says the humans are teaching our engineering teams how to build more effective defensive systems. Teaching our engineers? Drahorn's voice carried the kind of disbelief usually reserved for impossible physics. These are support personnel. Apparently, sir, the human-designated Torres has improved our plasma cannon efficiency by 37% using modifications he calls basic engineering principles. Another report arrived moments later. Admiral, Medical Officer Mortyn is requesting clarification on human physiology. He says they are continuing combat operations with injuries that should render them unconscious. Admiral Drahorn pulled up the human classification files. Class F, fragile species, he read aloud. Requires protective custody, cannot survive combat operations. His tactical display told a different story. The humans had not only survived the initial assault, they had organized the defense, improved the weapons, treated the wounded, and were apparently now conducting training seminars for the relief force. Sir, his aide interrupted nervously, we are receiving a transmission from Commander Marley. Put him through, Drahorn ordered, bracing himself for whatever impossible thing he was about to hear. Marley's voice crackled over the comm system with casual professionalism. Admiral Drahorn, base sanctuary is secure. We have 17 Mortyn prisoners, captured intact weapons for analysis, and minimal friendly casualties. The base is fully operational and ready to resume supply operations. How? Drahorn asked simply. There was a pause, as if Marley was considering how to explain something obvious to someone particularly slow. We fought back, sir, used what we had, adapted to the situation, worked as a team, pretty much what anyone would do when someone starts shooting at their friends. Admiral Drahorn closed his eyes and tried to reconcile the tactical impossibility he was witnessing with everything he thought he knew about warfare. Down on the planet's surface, Judge Quintara was having similar thoughts while watching Brandon Torres explain improvised explosive techniques to a group of veteran Regillian demolition experts. The fragile humans were teaching survival tactics to their superior alien rescuers. The universe, Quintara reflected, had a twisted sense of humor. Dr. Calix had been the Galactic Council's chief xenobiologist for over 4 decades. His species, the Academians, possessed 3 brains and were renowned throughout the galaxy for their analytical capabilities. He had personally classified over 200 species, and had never, not once, been this fundamentally wrong about anything. Run the planetary analysis again, he ordered his research team for the 7th time that morning. The data kept coming back the same, and each result made him question his own competence more deeply. His assistant, a nervous Ceridian named Flux, manipulated the holographic display with trembling appendages. The results are consistent, Dr. Calix. Sol 3, the human homeworld, registers as a Class 12 death world on the Habitability Index. That is impossible, Calix muttered, his primary brain working overtime while his secondary brains handled the mathematical calculations. We classified them as fragile. Fragile species do not evolve on death worlds. The planetary data was undeniable. Earth's gravity was nearly twice galactic standard. The atmospheric composition included a highly corrosive gas called oxygen that would be considered toxic by most civilized species. The weather patterns included phenomena that could only be described as actively hostile to life. The temperature variations, Flux continued reading, range from -40 to +50 degrees Celsius. The planet experiences regular geological instability, including volcanic activity, seismic events, and something called hurricanes, that generate wind speeds capable of destroying most structures. Dr. Kellogg's 3rd brain, usually reserved for creative thinking, began connecting dots that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. What about the biological survey? The other life forms on their planet? Flux pulled up the ecosystem data, his natural coloration shifting to a pale blue that indicated extreme stress. Sir, this planet is populated by nightmare creatures. There are land predators weighing over 4 tons with bite forces capable of crushing titanium. Flying creatures with 8-foot wingspans that hunt in coordinated packs. Marine life forms that can reach lengths of 30 meters and possess enough electrical discharge to power a small city. And the humans evolved alongside these creatures? Kellogg's asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Not alongside, sir. They evolved as apex predators. The humans were the creatures that everything else was afraid of. Meanwhile, in the aftermath of the base sanctuary incident, a very different kind of revelation was taking place. Judge Quintara had requested detailed interviews with the human personnel, hoping to understand how they had accomplished their impossible victory. So, Commander Malley, Quintara began carefully, you mentioned that your defensive tactics were pretty standard. Could you elaborate on where you learned these techniques? Malley looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Basic training, mostly. Though a lot of it was stuff we picked up as kids playing war games in the neighborhood. War games? Quintara's voice climbed an octave. Children play war games on your planet? Sure, Malley shrugged. Hide and seek, capture the flag, paintball tournaments. Kids love that stuff. Builds teamwork, tactical thinking, physical fitness. Pretty much every human culture has some version of competitive combat games for entertainment. Quintara pulled up his notes from the standard military training protocols used by most galactic species. What humans called children's games bore a striking resemblance to advanced tactical exercises designed for elite military units. What about the pain tolerance we observed? Quintara pressed. Your medic continued working with severe injuries, and several of your personnel fought with broken bones. Malley considered this question seriously. Well, we learn early that if something hurts you either fix it or ignore it and keep going. Life is tough, and complaining does not make it easier. My grandmother used to say that pain is just weakness leaving the body. Your grandmother said that? Quintara made rapid notes. This was military training? No, she was a school teacher, Malley replied with a slight smile, but she also raised 6 kids during the Great Depression, so she knew a thing or two about toughness. Back in the research facility, Dr. Kellogg's was reviewing video footage from the battle with growing horror. The humans did not just fight like soldiers, they fought like a pack of predators protecting their territory. When one human was injured, the others immediately adjusted their positions to cover the vulnerable member. When they captured enemy weapons, they shared the improvements with everyone instantly. They are pack bonding with the alien personnel, he realized aloud. They are protecting beings they barely know as if they were family members. Flux nodded nervously. The behavioral analysis suggests that humans form protective attachments to any group they consider part of their pack. The alien soldiers at the base had become their pack. They would have died before abandoning. The final piece of the puzzle came from an offhand comment in Commander Mali's interview. When asked about Earth's dangers, he had laughed and said, "Our planet? Nah. Earth is pretty tame compared to some places. At least our predators are visible, and our weather is predictable most of the time." Dr. Kellogg stared at that statement for several minutes, his three brains processing the implications. Humans considered their death world homeworld to be tame. They had evolved in an environment so hostile that they viewed catastrophic weather and massive predators as minor inconveniences. "They are not fragile," he whispered, the truth finally sinking in. "They are the most successful apex predators in galactic history, disguised as harmless mammals." His emergency report to the Galactic Council contained a single devastating conclusion. They had not discovered a fragile species requiring protection. They had found a race of camouflaged war machines who were so naturally adapted to violence that they considered it a children's game, and they had been calling them fragile. The correction to the classification would need to be immediate and comprehensive. The humans were not Class F fragile species. They were something the galaxy had never encountered before. They were persistent predators who had learned to be civilized, but had never forgotten how to hunt. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 72 hours after Dr. Kellogg submitted his revised assessment. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall, most of them still processing the implications of what they had learned about their newest members. Judge Quintara stood at the central podium, holding the reclassification document that would fundamentally alter how the galaxy viewed humanity. His voice carried across the chamber with the weight of someone delivering news that nobody wanted to hear. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, his usual confidence replaced by barely concealed embarrassment, "we are here today to address a significant miscalculation in our initial assessment of the human species." A ripple of uncomfortable shifting passed through the assembly. Every species present had agreed with the original classification. Every military leader had signed off on the protective custody protocols. They were all equally wrong, and everyone knew it. After extensive review of recent combat data, planetary analysis and behavioral observations, the Council hereby reclassifies the human species from Class F fragile to Class A adaptive combatants, with full authorization for frontline military operations. The silence that followed was deafening. Class A adaptive combatants was the highest military classification possible, reserved for species that could function effectively in any combat environment against any opponent. Admiral Vashy, who had been dreading this moment for 3 days, slowly rose from his designated section. His mandibles clicked nervously as he activated the communication link to the human command structure. "Commander Mali," Vashy's voice carried across subspace with all the enthusiasm of someone announcing their own execution. "This is Admiral Vashy of the Galactic Defense Force. We are contacting you to formally apologize for our initial assessment of your species' combat capabilities." Commander Mali's response came through clearly, tinged with what sounded suspiciously like amusement. "No worries, Admiral. Happens all the time, actually. Back home, people used to think we were just hairless apes until we started building spaceships. We significantly underestimated your tactical abilities," Vashy continued, his voice growing more strained with each word. "And your pain tolerance, and your weapon improvisation skills, and your everything, really." "Hey, first impressions can be tricky," Mali replied with the kind of casual forgiveness that somehow made the whole situation more embarrassing. "You saw small, soft creatures with no natural weapons, and figured we would need protection. Makes perfect sense from your perspective. Judge Quintara leaned toward his microphone. The Council would like to formally request that human forces take over tactical command of the war against the Mortyn Empire. Your unconventional methods appear to be highly effective. There was a pause before Marley responded, and when he did, his tone suggested he was trying not to laugh. Sure thing, Judge. We can handle that. Fair warning though, our tactics might seem a bit unusual by your standards. Unusual? How? Quintara asked, though he was beginning to suspect he did not want to know the answer. Well, Marley's voice carried the tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. We tend to be pretty aggressive about protecting our friends. And by aggressive, I mean we usually do not stop fighting until everything that threatened our people is permanently neutralized. The council chamber fell silent again as the implications sank in. The species they had classified as too fragile for combat was now volunteering to personally handle their most dangerous enemies. Admiral Drahorn, monitoring the conversation from his flagship, found himself wondering how he would explain this development to his superiors. The war effort was now being led by creatures his own reports had described as pathetically vulnerable and requiring constant protection. The irony was almost too perfect. The fragile humans had become the galaxy's primary military asset simply by demonstrating what they considered normal behavior. As the council session concluded and various species representatives began updating their military protocols, one thought echoed through the chamber with crystal clarity. Perhaps, in the future, they should avoid judging a species' combat effectiveness by whether or not they came equipped with natural armor plating. After all, some of the most dangerous predators in the universe looked completely harmless right up until they started hunting. The humans had just taught the galaxy that lesson in the most direct way possible. Admiral Vashy stood in the command center of the newly constructed battle station, Perseverance, watching tactical displays that showed something he had never expected to see in his lifetime. The Mortyn Empire was in full retreat. 6 months of human tactical leadership had transformed a grinding stalemate into a decisive victory. The same creatures he had once dismissed as tissue paper with delusions of adequacy had systematically dismantled the galaxy's most feared military force using strategies that defied every conventional wisdom he had ever learned. Admiral? His aide reported, the Mortyn High Command is requesting surrender terms. Vashy's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter or despair. What are the humans offering them? Commander Marley says they can surrender unconditionally and be treated with dignity, or they can keep fighting and discover why humans call it total war. The aide paused, checking his notes. The Mortyn chose surrender, sir. Apparently they have been monitoring human historical databases and decided they would prefer not to experience what humans did to their own species during something called World War II. Through the observation deck, Vashy could see human personnel moving with their characteristic efficiency. Brandon Torres was explaining some new weapon modification to a group of fascinated Regalian engineers. Amy Kowalski was teaching emergency medical procedures to alien medics who hung on her every word. The galaxy's former fragile species had become the beings everyone else looked to for protection. Sir, his aide continued nervously, the Council is requesting human security details for all major installations. They want the apex predators watching over their most important facilities. Vashy nodded slowly, remembering his original assessment of humanity. No natural armor, no claws, no obvious weapons. Just persistence, adaptability, and an inexplicable willingness to fight impossible odds for beings they barely knew. Make a note for future species evaluations, Vashy told his aide. Never judge a book by its cover, especially if that book happens to be a manual on advanced warfare disguised as a collection of peaceful poetry. Some lessons, he reflected, were worth learning the hard way.